The first scream I heard that morning didn't sound human at all, and out on the edge of the Arizona territory, that usually meant one of two things: a man dying alone, or a beast that had found blood. The sun was just climbing over the red hills when my horse stiffened beneath me, ears pinned, and that was when I saw the churned earth, the snapped brush, and the unmistakable steel jaws of a bear trap half buried in the dust, clamped shut around a slender leg that most men in those days would have ignored or finished off without a thought. Because the woman lying there was Apache, her dark hair matted with sweat and dirt, her face pale but proud even in pain, her teeth clenched so hard I thought they might shatter, and behind her in the brush I could hear the low, angry breathing of something big retreating. Maybe the bear that had set the trap off in the first place, or maybe something worse waiting to see what I'd do. She didn't beg, didn't cry, just stared at me with eyes sharp enough to cut steel. And in that look was a warning and a plea all at once, as if she already knew helping her would cost me more than I could afford. But leaving her would cost me my soul. I dismounted slowly, hands open, speaking the way you talk to a spooked horse or a wounded wolf, telling her I wasn't there to hurt her. Though in truth I wasn't sure I believed myself, because every story I'd grown up on said Apaches didn't forgive debts lightly, and widows least of all. The trap was old army iron, rusted but cruel, its teeth sunk deep, and when I knelt to pry it open she hissed in pain, finally letting out a sound that cracked something open in my chest. Because it wasn't fear in that sound, it was fury at a world that kept taking from her. It took all my strength and a whispered prayer to force the jaws apart. And when I did, blood poured free, dark and thick, soaking the sand, and for a moment I thought she'd pass out. But she stayed awake, gripping my arm with surprising strength, her fingers digging in like she was anchoring herself to life through me. I tore my shirt to bind the wound, knowing full well that if her people found me with her, they might hang me from the nearest cottonwood without bothering to ask questions. Yet I couldn't walk away, not after seeing the raw defiance in her eyes, the kind you only see in people who've already lost everything. When I lifted her, she didn't resist, just rested her forehead briefly against my shoulder. And in that small, fragile moment I understood she was a widow, because there was a silence around her that only comes when someone who once walked beside you is gone forever. And as we moved through the ravine toward my cabin, every snapped twig sounded like a rifle cocking, every shadow like a scout watching us. And I kept thinking this would be the day I finally paid for all the luck I'd borrowed from the frontier. I laid her on my table and cleaned the wound as best I could. And that was when I saw the scars on her arms, old ones, rope burns and blade marks, a map of survival etched into skin. And when she finally spoke, it was only 2 words, broken English, barely louder than breath. "He dead." And she didn't have to say more, because grief needs no translation. I fed her water, watched her sleep, and all night long I sat with my rifle across my knees, staring at the door, knowing that by sunrise this act of mercy would come due, because in the Wild West nothing stayed hidden for long. And sure enough, when dawn broke, the ground outside my cabin was already marked with fresh tracks, many of them silent and deliberate. And as I stepped outside to face whatever judgment was coming, I realized this wasn't just about saving a woman from a trap anymore. This was about a choice that would echo through my life, a choice that would bind me to her people in ways I couldn't yet imagine. And if this story already has your heart beating a little faster, if you want to know why an entire Apache band would demand I take her the next morning, then stay with me, because what comes next changed everything. And before the sun sets on this tale, you'll understand why some debts can never be repaid, only lived with. So make sure you subscribe and walk the rest of this road with me, because the frontier doesn't forget, and neither do the stories born from it. By the time the sun cleared the ridge, they were already there, silent as ghosts, a half-circle of Apache warriors standing beyond my cabin with bows strung and rifles resting easy, not raised but ready, and at their center stood the elder, his face carved by years of war and loss, eyes fixed not on me but on the woman behind, me who now stood on her, wounded leg without flinching. Her chin lifted, strength blazing where pain should have been. I expected anger, demands for blood, maybe even a bullet before words. But instead the elder spoke calmly, saying their scouts had seen everything. How I freed her from the iron jaws meant to kill, how I carried her when I could have left her to die, and how among their people a life saved was not a thing that faded with the night. She was a widow, they told me, her husband fallen months before, her place in the world unsteady, and by their law, the man who pulled her back from death now carried responsibility for her future, not as a prize, not as a debt of flesh, but as a bond of protection and honor. My throat went dry as they made it plain. They demanded I take her, stand for her, and in doing so stand between their people and the vengeance of the world that hunted them. And in that moment I understood refusal would shame her and invite war, while acceptance would change my life forever. She met my eyes then, no fear in them, only a quiet question, and I nodded before my mind could argue. Because some choices aren't weighed, they're answered. The elder smiled once, brief and solemn, and the warriors melted back into the land, leaving us alone in the dust, two survivors bound by a single act of mercy. And as we turned back toward the cabin and whatever future waited beyond it, I knew this wasn't the end of the story, only the beginning. And if you want to hear how that choice reshaped everything, how trust grew where hatred once lived, then don't forget to subscribe, because the Wild West was built on moments like this, and the next tale is even wilder. The days that followed were harder than the moment I said yes, because words are easy compared to living with their weight. And every sunrise brought new eyes watching us, from the ridges, from the trees, from a past that didn't trust a white man's promise. But she stayed, learning the rhythm of my cabin the way she'd once learned the rhythm of the plains, moving quietly, purposefully, never acting like a burden, never like someone owned. And that alone earned my respect more than fear ever could. Her name, spoken softly one evening by the fire, meant she who endures, and it fit her like the scars on her skin, because she didn't just survive the world, she faced it head-on, even when pain flared in her healing leg and grief crept into her eyes at night. The Apaches came and went, never threatening, never friendly, only watching to see if I'd break the bond I'd accepted. And when trouble finally did arrive, as trouble always does in the Wild West, it wasn't from her people, but from mine. A trio of men who saw an Apache woman and thought they smelled weakness, only to learn too late that some lines, once crossed, demand a price. She stood beside me when it ended, not hiding, not shaking. And the next morning the elder returned, and nodded once and said I had honored the debt. And in that moment I understood the truth no frontier tale ever tells you. Mercy doesn't make you soft, it makes you responsible. And if this chapter showed you that survival is more than pulling a trigger, if you want to hear how this unlikely bond reshaped a land built on blood and borders, then stay with this channel, subscribe, and keep riding with me, because the Wild West's greatest battles were never just fought with guns, but with choices that refused to die.